independent work.
I thought the movie would close one class.
It's to prepare for the movie.
Okay.
Oh, that's on my account. I clicked the email and something. Yep.
Okay, guys, so our first presenter is Lane Allen. So welcome her with some applause. We will do our questions and answers at the end of all 4 presentations. So if you do have questions, just try and keep a mental note of them or write them down. And we'll have a few minutes at the end to talk about them. So Lane, whenever you're ready.
Hello, my name is Lane Allen. This is my 7th year at Webb, and for my senior presentation, I wanted to address Native American cultural appropriation in retail. It's insanely common for modern businesses and artists to copy Native art, one of the most infamous examples being Urban versus the DNA Nation. In 2012, Urban, the company that owns Urban Outfitters, Anthropologie, and Free People, released these items, flasks, socks, and underwear, saying that they were Navajo. Not only were the DNA people appalled that they were being associated with alcoholism and promiscuity publicly, but Urban didn't even care to use their preferred title. They prefer the term DNA because it means the people, and it's a self-given term. Navajo was given to them by Spanish missionaries. The grounds of the case were that it violated the Native Arts and Crafts Act of 1990, which says that in order for a non-Native business or person to sell a Native-inspired item, they have to say that it's Native-inspired or Native style. Otherwise, it's Native impersonation. The case ended in a compromise in which these items were taken down and then they collaborated on a Native respecting collection. But however, this is possible because the Crafts Act is a truth in lending law, which means that this can still happen as long as the word style or the word inspired is used when selling it. If these laws were stricter, then things like this wouldn't happen and no one would get offended. And so, there we go. The main reason that people and corporations deem this okay is because our society paints natives as a thing of the past. From butter to professional sports to our local high school, historic portrayals of natives are plastered everywhere. In addition to that, for many non-natives, Native culture is seen as like nostalgic, representing a simpler time when the cowboys and the Indians roamed the West. This seems innocent until we realize that it's erasure. If natives aren't being put in the present tense and we are seeing them as past tense, how are they supposed to be respected in the present? In addition to their struggle for societal success, natives often struggle for financial success. Today, a third of all natives live in poverty with a median income of $23,000 a year. Many people also falsely assume that casinos and energy projects make reservations wealthy when that's generally not the case. Casinos on average bring in 25 jobs, and energy projects bring in on average 12, which on an average reservation size of 2,000 people doesn't really make a dent. In addition to that, both of these are very expensive projects that often drive reservations further into debt than they were before. Because art is 30% of the Native economy, it's a worthwhile investment to support Native artists and get their economy going. One way in which to achieve this is by making artist grants more available. First Peoples Fund is an organization specifically for this purpose. They have found that 61% of all Native artists have an annual income of less than $10,000. However, only 7.5% of First Peoples Fund supported artists can say the same. That's a 53.5% drop, which is pretty incredible. So grants like these and organizations like these need more advertising and more publicizing in order for donors to be attracted and to get that number down to 0. The best route to take here, in my opinion, would be to advertise and grow Native art festivals. The Santa Fe Indian Art Festival is an annual art festival that hosts 80,000 attendees a year and brings in about $100 million in revenue across 1,000 artists. In 2012 alone, they brought in $18,000 of art profit and put $122 million into the New Mexican economy. Artists receive 60 to 80% of their income, of their annual income at this festival, which is up to a 6-figure salary. In addition to that, the SWAIA, or Southwestern Association of Indian Art, regulates this festival, and they make sure that it strictly follows the Crafts Act. There's a rigorous application process that requires certification that you are Native American before you can vend there, and then they ensure that all products sold by the vendors are made by them and not by somebody else. For my primary source, I interviewed Rose McKeithen, who is the secretary and speaker for the NAIA, or the Native American Indian Association out of Tennessee. She confirmed that appropriation is a pressing issue among Native community today, and that it does take income away from Native people. She also told me about her experience in the military, in which she traveled to China and saw Chinese people making cultural Native items and then later selling them and ripping the made in China tag off and selling them as authentic. When asked what her preferred solution would be to this, she said that there was no real solution because this is so culturally accepted. She also agreed that advertising powwows and Native events would really help this problem. On the local scale, I hope to expand our local Native markets. The MTSU Indigenous Peoples Powwow hosts 300 dancers a year, as well as many craftsmen and vendors. However, outside of the campus, not many people know about it. Dancers and vendors travel as far as from New Mexico, Canada, and Oregon to be here. And I think that if we were to, Mrs. McKeithen also told me that the NAIA hosts an annual powwow, so she knows that there is a significant amount of Native people in Tennessee, including many dancers, vendors, and artists. She also said that she was doing a similar thing right now. She's going to local Natives and advertising the NAIA to help them out financially. I think that with online advertising as well as printed local advertisements, these dancers and vendors could receive the recognition that they deserve. And then we could This could potentially grow to the size of the Santa Fe Indian Art Festival, potentially giving our local natives and natives in our area a sizable income and a living wage, and then also putting potentially millions into the Tennessee economy. This would also serve as a reminder to Southerners to think before buying cultural items, or at least rip-off cultural items. This issue is a tough one to solve because it's so normalized in America today. Native people live in poverty, but with an outlet to sell their art or more Native grants, they could get out of this cycle and live comfortably. But this is something that I can't unwind as a 17-year-old. Susan Scafidi, the author of Who Owns Culture? Appropriation and Authenticity in American Law, invented the 3 S's: source, significance, and similarity. Is the person that made this a member of the culture that it's from? Is this culture open to sharing this item? Are these people historically exploited? What is this item's cultural gravity? Is this a ripoff or authentic? Before you look into a cultural item, I ask you to ask yourself these questions and do your research, because it's encouraged that anyone and everyone buys Native items, but we need to do our part as consumers to support the right people. And here are my citations and my image credits. Thank you.
You can just exit out of that tab, like X and X again.
Okay, and so welcome, Sugri. And again, questions at the end, okay?
Alright, so my name is Sugri Boba. This is my 3rd year in the web school, and my project is putting an end to racism. So what is racism? Racism is the hatred or discrimination against or toward a certain group of people, race or ethnic group solely because of the color of their skin, and or the amount of pigment they have in their skin or lack thereof. So over here I have a timeline of events that went on, major events that went on in Black history. So in the year 1619, the first slaves were brought over to America. And, they were put on ships where they didn't have enough food to eat. They weren't allowed to go outside of the cabin they were put in. They were forced to sleep in their own waste products, and which caused many of them to die of diseases, ill-related diseases, before they could even make it to America. Before they were even put on the boats, on the ships to be brought to America, they were kept in slave castles or dungeons in their respective African countries, where they had similar conditions on the ship, if not worse. There was barely any lights in the dungeons. I visited one when I was back home. They had about 3 holes on the wall where you could barely see anything. There was thousands of them stuck in the dungeons, and the guards actually raped some of the women, impregnated them, and they ended up killing some of the children or forcing them into slavery. In the year 1865, the 13th Amendment was passed to abolish slavery, and a lot of the slave masters weren't happy with it because the black people were seen as property, so it was like losing a car or losing a house, and they made a loss from that. In 1965, there was a law passed to prohibit racial discrimination in voting, they had tests like they had reading tests where if the slave couldn't pass the test, they weren't allowed to vote, or and they had a law that was like that stated that if your grandfather or grandparent was a slave, then you weren't allowed to vote. In the year 2009, America had its first African American president, former President Barack Obama, and this was a major milestone in Black history. Even though it was a huge milestone for black people in America, I still think there's a long way to go because there's still people that think that black people shouldn't be allowed to have that kind of power or equality. So it brings us next to police brutality. What is police brutality? Police brutality is harassment, which is usually fueled by discrimination. And the most common one that we see is racially fueled. So we have over here I have a chart of you can see the percentages of people in America that are in 2020 that were harassed that were killed by police brutality. As you can see, 28% of them were black Americans, and 72% was everyone else, making black Americans the #1 victim of police brutality in America, with recent killings like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. So what are the effects of police brutality? #1 effect is fear. Like it makes people scared. It makes people scared of the police, especially when you go out. Like sometimes you know you haven't done anything wrong, but just the fact that you've seen on the news that innocent people have been killed, you ask yourself like, if what I also get killed today because the people that I saw on the news weren't doing anything bad. It also makes people have less trust for the officers of the law because like who do you call now when you're in trouble? Because the people supposed to be protecting you are killing you, so now you're scared of them. And you have causes of racism. The first one is ignorance. Basically the people are just oblivious to the fact that everyone is the same. No matter the color of their skin, the only thing that separates us is the amount of pigment we have in our skin. The second one is oral tradition. For example, if someone's grandparents were raised in a time of slavery, they will pass it down to their children and grandchildren that it's okay to hate people of certain colors or certain races. And we have full scientific research. In the past, there was research that stated that black people were closer to animals or were animals to justify the fact that they were being racist and to justify why they kept them as slaves. Or even sometimes the Bible, they refer to the Bible and say, it says in this Bible scripture, so it's okay to have these certain number of people as slaves. And we have effects of racism. The first one is low unemployment rate. There was a study that showed that if you have a name of English origin, you're more likely to get a job as compared to a black person that has any other name or names that are commonly given to African American people, and which leads to increasing crime rates because now that people don't have jobs to do, or black people don't have jobs to do, they're now going around committing crime just to earn a living or feed their families. And it also leads to police brutality because now the police are seeing them as, okay, these are the certain race of people that are committing these crimes, so they now stereotype everyone or put that whole race in one group, and just because there are a couple of bad people that committed these crimes. It also leads to death. You could see a huge number of black people getting killed by the police, or just because of the color of their skin, or because of the color of their skin. So my solution is, I think we should educate the younger generation. I believe that whatever you teach a child, the child grows with it, and you should teach more about Black history in American schools. And the next one is raising awareness. I think you should raise awareness. For an example of this was the Black Lives Matter movement after the killing of George Floyd. And I think it shouldn't be seen as just as a trend or once in a while kind of thing. I think we should be consistent with it, because the more consistent we are with it, the effective it's going to be. And this is my work cited.
My name is Slade Bowers. This is my 5th year at Webb, and my project is over youth engagement in politics. So why would I choose this as my senior project? Over the last couple of years, as our political climate has grown more and more polarized and hatred filled, I've noticed the attitude amongst people my age growing more and more cynical and even apathetic in some cases towards the political system and the politicians running in it. And I found this trend to be very disturbing, because our system of government relies on the enthusiasm of voters and the willingness to contribute from them. If we don't have that in a representative democracy, if you're not paying attention to who you're voting to represent you, you'll just vote for the name that's more familiar rather than the name that you know will do best for you. So I decided to investigate some of the causes and come up with a couple of solutions, maybe for this problem, in an attempt to right the ship and get us back on track to a more healthy representative democracy. So, introduction with a couple of pie charts. Here we have global population demographics. As you can see, 20% of the global population is within the 15 to 25 age demographic. However, according to the Harvard Institute of Politics, only 10% of the 18 to 24 demographic met the standard of political information needed to make sound decisions during the 2012 elections. This is a disturbing figure to me, because that's only 2% of that chart on the left. So, my primary research to start this out was a survey. I figured I could read all day long, sort different sources from different journals and such, but the best kind of research I could get to why people aren't interested in politics is just by asking them. So it was designed to gauge the political awareness and general aptitude of the Webb community. My participants ranged from age 11 to 18. And as you can see from the national demographics, they were overwhelmingly American, although we did have 2 Chinese participants, 1 Vietnamese and 1 Bahamian. So the results of the survey. The numbers. These 3 questions were asked on a yes, no, maybe, and then they were compiled into a chart. Are you interested in politics? Would you consider yourself knowledgeable in your national politics, so the federal government? And would you consider yourself knowledgeable in your local politics, so city government, governors, this kind of thing? And I consider these to be important, different questions to ask, because it's easy to get jaded with national politics if you don't know anything about local politics, because as we know, the president, as divisive as they can be, doesn't really have that much of effect on our daily lives, but our city council does, and our boards of school boards do, and our mayors do. So the results of this survey, part of the survey, are you interested in politics? I really like this answer. About 30% said yes, and almost 50% said moderately. So that's the majority of the chart have some interest in politics, whereas about 20% say absolutely not. Would you consider yourself knowledgeable in your nation's politics nationally? Here at the bottom, about the same fractions. We have 37% yes, 41% maybe, and about 20% no still. But where I suspected that it would get rough was this question about local politics, where we see yes go down to just 26%, and maybe be 27%, and almost 50% say no. I believe this is where a lot of our jadedness comes from. We don't see the actual on-the-ground politicians who want to help. We only see the millionaire politicians who are entrenched. Next was the general knowledge test. On among other questions, I asked who is your nation's current leader, who is your provincial/state governor, and who is the mayor/leader of your town. Everybody got their nation's current leader. That was the president at the time, Donald Trump, and many even said who was going to be president next. Who is your provincial/state governor? This was still mostly correct, but when we got down to mayor on the town level, it was almost a wash with no one really knowing who the mayor of their town was. Testimony. So these questions were fill in the blank, so they could be as long or as short as they wanted. I wish I could share some of the answers, but most of them were a paragraph or longer, so I don't really have time to get into many of them. But the questions were, why are politics important/not important to you? Do you feel the interests of young people are underrepresented in politics? Would you support lowering the minimum voting age to 16, and would you support lowering the age to run for office? Do you feel the interest of young people are underrepresented in politics? Was pretty resoundingly yes. But the most interesting answer on this part of the survey was lowering the minimum voting age to 16. I don't personally support that, but I asked the question to gauge how everyone would react to it. I figured that many people would support that, but it was actually the opposite. Most people said absolutely not. Many actually suggested making the voting age higher to coincide with the age you're allowed to drink. And now, the most important question on the survey: what could be done to encourage young people to get invested in politics? This question was divided between this question up here, why are politics important/not important to you? You got a different version, whether it was what could be done to encourage you to get invested in politics if you were not interested, and you got this question if you were. I put these answers because they were some of my favorites, and I wanted them to be able to be read as they were written to me. Current events in the classrooms, that's civics education. We're going to talk about that in a second. But whoever did their senior paper on that, great job. Helping their community, that's getting in touch with local government, that's great. That's getting in touch with the human side of politics. We have another one about civic education, chance to be heard, chance to engage in discussion. And then this one's very interesting to me. Using AOC as an example, however divisive she is, as an example of a politician who young people relate to because they feel that she's relatable. They feel like she's one of them. She represents their interests. And she was able to gain a lot of support off of that alone. I feel like we need more young politicians to engage young people in politics and feel like they are being heard rather than just older people. So, taking all this into account, I came up with two solutions, one more realistic, one that I would like to see done, to try and address this issue. First is civics education. That was referenced in those two answers to the question earlier. This would go over the history of voting rights. Firstly, I don't think we go over this enough. Suffrage was not always for everyone in this country. I think a lot of people take their voting rights for granted because they don't realize or don't think about that it's not a given. You know, it's a gift that we get to vote, especially we have a timeline here, how long it took us to get to everyone voting, almost 200 years. So that is something that we need to go over in our civics classes. And also the discussion of contemporary issues from a youth perspective. We do this very well in our democracy classes. We have our discussions. We have students bring in issues that are important to them, and we discuss them amongst students. We do this very well here, but I would like to see this extended out into other schools, primarily the public school system. However, this doesn't happen very often because up to 25% of teachers surveyed believe that politics would not be welcome in the classroom because of parent reactions at home. In order to challenge this, we have to have parents that trust their kids to engage with political ideas and think for themselves, basically. My final solution here is the Youth Congress. It's a very ambitious idea. It would be a body made up of representatives from ages 16 to 18 from all over the nation. There would be just as many of them as there are senior congressmen. There would be a Senate and the House of Representatives, and they would serve two functions. One, they would act as youth advisors to the senior congressmen and women. They would give their words of advice in regards to protests and youth culture and these kinds of things, to give older congressmen more of an idea of what the youth need and want. They would also serve as a youth body to recommend legislation to Congress, however many times a year that would be allowed. The elections would be conducted alongside regular elections. and children from the age, or teenagers, I guess, from the age of 13 to 18 would be eligible to vote. I believe that this system would increase three major factors: representation. Young people would feel more represented in government, like they have some kind of a say. They would build the legitimacy of young people's ideas. They would feel that their ideas are being heard more and legitimized in the popular sphere, and it would build voting habits. If you start voting at the age of 13 every 2 years, you are more likely to continue voting onwards as that habit builds. I believe that this system could bring more civic engagement to our young people and lead us to a brighter democratic future. Thank you. Oh, you're signed in, it's me. That's strange. Can we exit the tab and then have a re-sign in?
Yeah, I would just exit the tab and start all over from your login. So close all that, slate, so
here,
everybody
yeah,
else.
close it, just close all that.
Close everything.
Yeah, and now press Control Shift N. There you go.
So, hello everyone. My name is Shanice. This is my first year at WEM. Today I will be talking about a big topic, which is reducing crime in communities for North Dakota. This slide is about the different types of crimes. So, drug possession, vandalism, fraud, property crimes, assault, weapon charges, and violent crimes. These crimes are the most popular, and a lot of people tend to fall into these kinds of crimes. These crimes are different in their own ways, and some are more serious than others. On this next slide, I'll be talking about causes of crime, and how each kind of falls right behind each other. With early age exposure, this is mostly about children that experience crimes and go through trauma at an early age. With living conditions, some areas are more crime effective than others. And with families, it usually gets passed on throughout different generations. Another cause of crime is stress. People handle stress differently, especially when they are pressured. This pressure then leads to feeling different kinds of emotions, such as depression. And depression and stress can also lead them to turning to drugs and alcohol for comfort. Schools are also another cause of crime. Unfortunately, not many people have access to schools or jobs. This can be because they are influenced by other people or motivated by the people around them. Where do crimes often occur? So here are the three top states where crimes are mostly happen. The first one is Alaska, the second one is Nevada, and the third one is Tennessee. And just here's a fun fact: a violent crime occurs every 26.3 seconds. And here's also a map that has the rest of the states with violent crime. This slide is about crime prevention programs. These three programs play a big role in crime prevention throughout the United States. The first one is called security surveys, and this one just identifies targets that are vulnerable to crime. The second one is kind of the most popular, and this one encourages residents to work together in making neighborhoods safer. And the last one is Operation Identification, where you just reduce the value of items in like a store or something in case of burglary. This slide is about neighborhood problems. So people aren't always in control of where they live and don't always have the opportunity to move somewhere safer. With young people, they witness illegal activities from an early age, and that influences them to also make another illegal activity. With this being said, families do not feel safe, and they wouldn't want their children to grow up in that way. And this is another fact. Neighborhoods that experience more disadvantages are known to have a more increased chance of violence. Firearms are also another big thing that are in crimes. So in 1998, over 330,000 youth handguns were involved in violent crimes. And then in the 21st century, the use of firearms was the 8th leading cause of death in the U.S. Firearms also include like bombs and poison and other stuff like that. This slide is about how we can reduce crime. So the first way is creating crime prevention programs like I had mentioned before. These programs will allow people to think of strategies and preventing future crimes. Then falls right behind is respecting our neighbors. We should know who our neighbors are and respect the way that they live. This will also allow extra protection to the home. So kind of like a neighborhood watch. Like if you go on vacation or something, you should trust that your home will be fine unattended. They can also report something suspicious or unusual and vice versa. Another way crimes can be reduced is by improving community safety. This means improving transportation, such as buses, subways, buildings, houses, because nobody would really want something else burned down. The next one is allowing more people to have access to these improvements. Allowing more people to have access to these improvements. And the next one is keeping the environment clean. This means parks and just keeping the environment friendly for people, because clean things attract more people. In this case, it'll make other people make better decisions instead of creating crimes such as like littering, illegal pesticides. Improving access to education and jobs to make people more motivated to maintain school or employment instead of dropping out or instead of maintaining their career. This next slide is about how to prevent crime. So as you can see here, the ages 10 to 15 is mostly high risk. This is like the preteen age. So preteens should be doing therapy where they use their communication skills and thinking where they should feel comfortable. Ages 18 and above are adults, and they should be provided vocational training, which is just a program where they can help to get a job. Frequent crime offenders should be offered the opportunity to be in a rehabilitation program, and they should also be monitored by police frequently. Did you know that children aged 3 to 4 who didn't go to preschool are more likely to commit crime by the age of 18? Where do we stand now? So after this presentation, we learned that many people get involved in crime, but it's not always by choice. Sometimes it can be at the wrong place at the wrong time. We also learned that with communities, people are counting on authorities most of the time, but it's also our job to help prevent small situations from reoccurring. This is my story.
presenters maybe go stand at the front of the room so we can ask our questions. Good job, you guys. So audience, if you have questions for them, please raise your hand, but then name the person that you're directing your question to.
For Slate, your youth council idea is very intriguing. Have you thought so far as to how they would assemble or what that might look like?
Yeah, I didn't have time to include it in the presentation, but the idea would be that they would board in Washington. They would go to school in Washington, while also living in dorms made for them to live in to meet every so often. They would also be paid federal minimum wage.
Slate, I have a follow-up. Did you look into the PAGE program at all?
No, ma'am.
You did not?
No.
Okay. The PAGE program is typically over the summers, and it allows youth to work with their representatives, and maybe also a way to sort of engage more people, potentially even just making sure that people know about the PAGE programs.
Okay.
Come on, kiddos, I have lots of questions. My advisory. No?
We all paid attention today, huh?
Sugri, what do you think can you talk at all about the influence of mainstream media and how it affects people's view of racism or of different races, of different people? Did you look at all into mainstream media or social media effects?
No, ma'am, but I think most of the time on like TV, the people that we usually see committing the crimes are people of like color. So I think that usually what we see on TV or social media is how we see the world, because people tend to how to explain this? Because that's all they're showing us. Like,
Inform their ideas around what they're exposed to.
Jaden?
As far as like, I know COVID-19 and racism, like that was kind of like a group, like last year when George Floyd passed away. Do you think like COVID-19 made, racism a more prominent thing at that time in society? Did it make it go more in a negative direction? What do you think about that?
I don't think it made it go more in a negative direction. I think because of COVID, people were out of work, they didn't have things to do, so I think it actually gave people the time to pay more attention to racist issues going on in the world.
Concerning cultural appropriation, would the use of certain cultures' technologies be considered appropriation?
What do you mean by technologies?
Like Phoenician ships and Romans or Gaulish helmets and the Romans?
Relationships. I don't think the use of anything is a cultural appropriation. But I don't know that there are current Romans that make Phoenician ships and things like that, and that, have a financial problem. That's kind of the driver for, the issue in my project. But if that were the case, then I wouldn't buy, a Venetian ship from a giant corporation. And then, if I knew that it was going to help someone, then I would buy it, from an actual craftsman who made it. So just kind of, I don't think the use of anything is cultural appropriation, certain cultural medicines and stuff are used by everyone, but, just using it correctly, and getting it from the right people is the issue.
If the Romans had Carthaginians on reservations and then faked Carthaginian ships, that might be cultural appropriation.
Sure.
Yeah.
I had a question for Shanice. I'm really floored by the statistic of violent crime for states, and Alaska 1, Tennessee, was it 2 or 3? 2.
No, 3.
3. Well, still, Because there's no correlation between those two cultures as a whole, so I don't know why that they would be so high. Is there any indication why? Alaska, I don't know. I've seen Alaska State Trooper. I know it's crazy up there. But I'm really surprised that they weren't all like large urban. Neither are large urban centers. Sparsely populated Alaska is certainly, and Nashville's nothing like Northeast or the California. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know if you came across anything. I found that fascinating, though. Thank you.
Jaden, did you have another question?
No, it's okay.
Go ahead.
It's really for like all of you. Did you face any like hatred based on the topics that you chose for your projects?
Oh, no, no, no.
Yeah, I had a couple people ask me why I did it because it's such a niche topic, but I didn't have haters about it.
Mine is pretty neutral, so I didn't face any opposition on that one. I was going to do something else that I faced opposition towards, and I switched to this one. So this one isn't so bad.
Lane, why was that important to you? Are you like Native American culture?
I am not, quantitative enough in Native American genes to consider myself Native American, but my great-grandmother is, and she's still alive today, and so she's told me, her house is completely covered in, Native artwork and stuff like that, so she's taught me a lot about that, and then I've also, for a long time, I've loved to support Native art, and buy it. I love it, so I have plenty of it, and then I've been researching it for a long time. So that's kind of where that idea came from.
I have a question for you, Shanice. You had some interesting data in your presentation. Two things that really stood out to me, and I think we can connect them, was your fact about preschools and that young kids who don't have the opportunity to go to preschool may potentially have more opportunity to commit crime later. And so I'm wondering how that maybe connects to some of the social issues. You reported that neighborhoods that have more disadvantages, and so I'm wondering if you could clarify what you mean by disadvantages and if those are connected.
I think it's just more like how I said, improving community safety and stuff like that. So I guess the buses and the transportation, like I said, no one would really want something, if people aren't happy with something that's broken or can't really use.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think that could be one of the relations with it.
I was wondering if social programming came up at all in your research, because if you think about access to preschools, not all areas have free preschool options for families.
Yeah, no, I didn't really look into social programming.
Any other questions? You guys did a fantastic job.
Great job. Thank you.
You guys can now take a deep breath.